I think there's definitely a prejudice among people in San Francisco and Austin and Brooklyn and Portland and Seattle that this is where it's happening, and it couldn't be happening in Pittsburgh or Louisville or Muncie. And I know you know this from going to maker fairs in all these cities, and I've experienced it from traveling around. There is an incredibly vital community, huge amounts of interest. And so tell me about what ecosystems need to be created to facilitate this all over the country.
Well, you know, in some ways, I've seen it a bit evolve through maker fairs, and we just announced a new maker fair coming up in Chicago in April 22nd and 23rd at McCormick Place. And you know, even in the sort of dozen years I've been working on this, initially it was pretty hard to go out and find the makers and the places they are and the institutions or even corporations that might be, you know, connecting to it. And now they've actually, you know, have a more defined ecosystem. A lot still to do here, but, you know, the public library, the Museum of Science.
This is a great opportunity for the library, which is looking for a mission,
absolutely.
right?
Libraries have actually been first in line.
Yeah.
They've been saying, we are trying to figure this out. But what I like it is libraries are always about learning for yourself, going in there and saying, hey, I want to do this. And the librarian says, well, you know, there's a book over there.
Yeah.
So this is really, behind Making is really, how do I learn to do things that I want to do? Not necessarily what the school wants me to do, but things that I'm interested in. And so they have been, school libraries are pretty much going away and, you know, as a useful place, but school librarians aren't going away. They're creating maker spaces. Yeah. And I think in our public libraries, we're seeing that, and they're, you know, also distributed throughout cities. So I think that's a good thing. I think there's also like an ecosystem around manufacturing that we need, you know, supply chains. You need to be able to learn from other people who have done this. That, I think, is still immature in a lot of places.
Well, there's an advantage. People talk all the time. If you want to be a startup, you go to San Francisco because there's the kind of knowledge base there and the people there, and so you learn by being there.
But I think places like universities are going to play that role. But I've been involved in a project with California community colleges where they're starting to set up maker spaces there.
Good.
And we can, you know, if I can get some of those folks going to a 2-year college involved and helping them find ways in their community to develop their ideas, I think that'd be very powerful.
We were so fortunate in California to have this system of higher education, the community colleges, the state colleges, the universities, and they were affordable, and it was a way for somebody to stay in public education and get a higher education. And I hope we keep that alive. That's so important.
Absolutely.
How about cities, Peter? Because I know you deal with cities. What can you do to get your city government to foster this?
One of the reasons ecosystems are so important is innovation tends to happen around the edges, right? It's the community colleges doing something, or a makerspace is doing something, or people are coming up with these art projects. And it's really connecting these things up and demonstrating value to cities that moves cities forward. And some of the most interesting things we've seen have come from the bottom up. For example, in Wenatchee, Washington, which is a very small apple-picking town in eastern Washington, it was a student who went to the Maker Faire in Seattle, saw that Maker Faire and thought, oh my, that's the future. We need to learn the future or we left behind. He came back to his high school, and his senior project was bring a Maker Faire to Wenatchee. And then he got the mayor and the city council engaged, had a conference, and then they started looking at workforce development issues and the fact that they're in the agriculture business and they had to learn more of the robot skills. And so that kind of came in bottom up. One of the key things that cities can do is literally make space that's affordable and available for makers to work on. Because oftentimes what you find in a city is there's fallow former, you know, dock space or manufacturing space like the Brooklyn Navy Yard or Pier 70 here or downtown spaces in Pittsburgh. And then people move in and then it becomes too expensive. So finding ways to make that stuff affordable, which is, if you look in San Francisco, SF Made is moving into a new space that has affordable stuff for makers. And they cut a deal with the city council where The developer was able to put up a building in the Mission District, which meant more office space in the Mission District, which the Mission didn't want more office space, but in return they got a bunch of space for making, manufacturing, and education. So there's kind of a major real estate thing that cities can do to think through how to support that stuff.
Just to give you a specific example, in Hartford, Connecticut, the old Colt manufacturing factory, the Colt, guns, they just created a maker space for Connecticut in there. So it's really kind of
You also talk about the role
space.
of nonprofits and even faith-based communities in this.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting one. My friend Jeff Sturgis set up a maker space in a church in Detroit, and he said, well, they already have a community. They have kids coming there. We'll just teach them electronics on Sunday morning after church. So wonderful.
That's awesome.
It's wonderful.